In an unexpected development, due to the skyrocketing amount of microplastics in both the environment as well as within the human body itself, well, you now have companies that are developing something called bioplastics. These are plastic alternatives that are specifically meant to be eaten by humans, which then, at least in theory, biodegrade within the human body. However, to understand even how we got to this point, let's take a step back and go through the full backstory. Right now, it's not a hyperbole to say that we as a society are quite literally swimming in microplastics. They're everywhere, including inside of our actual bodies. In fact, for the past 6 years now, more and more studies have come out showing exactly that. For instance, in the year 2018, researchers from the Medical University of Vienna, they published this study right here, which naturally shocked the world, because for the first time, it revealed that microplastics were discovered inside of the human body. This study, it took stool samples from one participant in 8 different countries. So one person from Finland, one person from the Netherlands, from the UK, from Italy, Poland, Russia, Japan, and Austria. And what the researchers found after analyzing the stool was that every person from every single country had microplastics discovered in their stool sample. Quote, "In all 8 persons, microplastics were detected in the stool. On average, 20 microplastic particles per 10 grams of stool. We were able to detect 9 different types of plastics ranging in size from 50 to 500 micrometers." This then opened up the floodgates of research in this particular field. The very next year, in 2019, the World Wildlife Federation, they published this study which estimated that we as humans either eat or breathe in about 2,000 tiny pieces of plastic every single week. Or, in other words, to put that into scale, each week we digest enough plastic to form a standard-sized credit card. Then, the next year, in the year 2020, this Irish study right here was published, which found that babies fed through bottles were swallowing millions of micro and nanoplastics on a daily basis. Quote, "Microplastics in the environment were already known to contaminate human food and drink, but the study shows that food preparation in plastic containers can lead to exposure thousands of times higher. The recommended high-temperature process for sterilizing plastic bottles and preparing formula milk caused bottles to shed millions of microplastics and trillions of even smaller nanoplastics." However, up until this point here, up until this study was published in the year 2020, all the research was only finding microplastics within the human digestive system, within the stomach, the colon, the stool, things like that. But that all changed with the publication of this study right here, also in the year 2020, and it was published by researchers over at the University of Arizona. And what they did was that they opened up cadavers and they checked various different organs looking for microplastics. And what they found were traces of microplastics in every single organ that they checked, including the lungs, the livers, the spleens, as well as the kidneys. This was one of the first studies, if not the first study, which found that microplastics can persist in our bodies outside of just the digestive system. Soon afterwards, though, that knowledge expanded even further. In the year 2022, you had this other study which found the presence of microplastics in the human blood for the first time. In that same year, in 2022, other scientists, they discovered microplastics in the lungs of living people for the first time. And then just earlier this year, in 2024, you had another study that was published out of the University of New Mexico, which found microplastics present in all of the human placentas that they tested. Quote, "The researchers found the most prevalent polymer in placental tissue was polyethylene, which is used to make plastic bags and bottles. It accounted for 54% of the total plastics. Polyvinyl chloride, better known as PVC, and nylon each represented about 10% of the total, with the remainder consisting of 9 other polymers." You then had another study, also published earlier this year in the year 2024, which found microplastics present in every human testicle that the researchers looked at. Quote, "The testes analyzed were obtained from postmortems in 2016, with the men ranging in age from 16 to 88 when they died. The scientists tested 23 human testes, as well as 47 testes from pet dogs. They found microplastic pollution in every sample." And so that is really wild if you stop to consider it. In the span of about 6 years, from 2018 up until 2024, we went from not knowing about microplastics being in the human body at all to now knowing that they are literally everywhere in the human body. And the reason why these microplastics are everywhere is not exactly a mystery. It's twofold. Firstly, our food is saturated with plastic components. I mean, our water comes in plastic bottles, Our meat comes in plastic wraps, coffee is served in plastic cups, microwavable meals are served in plastic trays with a plastic film over top, fruits are sold in plastic containers, you have plastic spoons, forks, and knives that are used for pretty much every takeout meal, and so on. And so physically, plastics are coming into contact with our food all the time. However, even if you were to become a monk and live out in the woods, or you became a hunter who exclusively ate what he killed, well, you would still be likely consuming vast amounts of plastic. That's because the second reason that our bodies are saturated with microplastics is because of the water. In fact, there was a study published just earlier this year by the U.S. Geological Survey, which showed that at least 45% of all American tap water contains what are known as forever chemicals. The title of the study was, quote, Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, in United States tap water, comparison of underserved private well and public supply exposures and associated health implications. Now, in that title right there, they reference something known as PFAS chemicals, which is a large class of chemicals that are often added to plastics in order to make them more water resistant or stain resistant. These are things like the coating on the inside of your coffee cup, which actually keeps it waterproof. It's super convenient, but the problem is when that coffee cup hits water, those forever chemicals in the coating, they get flushed down the drain and they enter the collective water supply. And once PFAS chemicals enter the water, well, they stay there for a very long time. There's a reason that they're called forever chemicals. You see, all PFAS chemicals at the molecular level, they contain carbon atoms bonded together with fluorine atoms. And these molecular chains are important because the bonds between carbon and fluorine, they are so strong that they cannot be broken by water, they can be broken by the enzymes in bacteria, and they cannot be broken by most other natural substances. Meaning that these strong chemical bonds make it such that PFAS chemicals just do not degrade naturally. They stick around in the human body as well as in the natural environment for a very, very long time. And they're also very stable, even when they're submerged in water, such that they can literally travel thousands of miles from their original source without getting degraded. And that's, again, exactly why people refer to them as forever chemicals, because once they're there, once they're in the environment, it's very hard to get rid of them. And so if you drink the water, you get the microplastics. If you eat meat that drank the water, you get the microplastics. If you eat the fish that swam in the water, you get the microplastics. Furthermore, compounding the problem even further is the fact that most plastic pollution in the water comes from Asia. In fact, you have just 9 countries, the Philippines, India, Malaysia, China, Indonesia, Myanmar, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Thailand collectively account for 80% of all the plastic pollutions in the world's oceans. Meaning that even if America were to find a solution for itself, if we were to solve the microplastic problem, it wouldn't be enough. The environment is getting too polluted by the mostly developing nations over in Asia. And so what this means in practical terms is that any viable alternative to plastics and to forever chemicals, they must have 2 characteristics. First of all, it must be cheap, because only if it's cheap will it be widely adopted by everyone, including the developing nations over in Asia. And second of all, it must be good. Any plastic alternative must be at least as good as what it's replacing. You're not going to get millions of people over in the Philippines to stop using plastic straws when the alternative is a paper straw that dissolves within minutes of hitting the drink. And so with all that as the backdrop, let's discuss a solution that's currently being worked on. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to introduce today's sponsor, which is a phenomenal company called My Patriot Supply. Look, even besides all the microplastics, obviously something coming on the horizon. You got wars raging in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. The market is in a state of free fall. And it seems like with every new session of Congress, no matter who's in charge, our God-given freedoms are being slowly taken away. And even worse, the ones who are doing the taking are exactly the same people who have been sworn to defend our freedoms. But you know what they can't take away? Self-reliance and the peace of mind that comes along with it, which is exactly why I would highly recommend that you stock up on all the emergency supplies that you might need right now. Just head on over to preparewithroman.com, which is the phenomenal URL that they created for me, and you can stock up on everything. You can stock up on water filtration systems, solar generators, emergency food that lasts for upwards of 25 years in your cupboard, and much more. And after serving literally millions of American families, well, My Patriot Supply is the most trusted name in survival. And best of all, they are running a phenomenal promotional sale right now where you can save $200 on their best-selling 3-month emergency food kits. They taste great, They again last for 25 years in the cupboard, and they give you over 2,000 calories per day right when you need it the most. And shipping is free. So again, just head on over to preparewithroman.com and save $200 off of each emergency food kit that you buy. I'll also throw the link down into the description box below. If you happen to have gotten any fast food takeout over the last several years, then there's a good chance that your food was served in a plant-based, fibrous paperboard container. There's also a good chance that somewhere within your order, maybe it was on the receipt paper, maybe it was at the bottom of the box or somewhere in the menu, but somewhere there was very likely a marketing message telling you that this was environmentally friendly, it was sustainable, it was made from some sort of recycled material, and that perhaps it was even compostable. Now, this whole thing is actually a relatively new phenomenon that many chain restaurants are switching toward, ostensibly in order to help the environment, but also to boost their ESG scores. By cutting down on single-use disposable plastic, the environmentalists give these companies a higher ESG rating, and therefore it's good for their investments. And it's happening among some of the biggest chains. For instance, in the year 2021, you had over 50 Burger King locations begin to test a green packaging pilot program for things like forks, spoons, knives, straws, French fry holders, burger wrappers, napkins, and so on. In that same year, McDonald's claimed that nearly all their napkins, their paper bags, their food wrappers, their cup carriers, and other fiber-based materials came from recycled or certifiably sustainable sources. Taco Bell, they announced its goal of making all of its packaging recyclable, compostable, or reusable by the year 2025. KFC made a similar pledge to eliminate single-use plastic by next year, also by 2025. Wendy's is aiming to join them by 2026, and the list just goes on and on and on. Now, on the one hand, this type of initiative is great. Having some of the largest chain restaurants in America get rid of their single-use plastics will probably reduce the amount of plastic pollution. So, on the one hand, this is definitely a good development. However, it's a good development only if what these companies are switching to is in fact better. For instance, here's a report that was published in The Counter. It's a publication focused on food. And this report detailed how the plant-based packaging over at Chipotle and Sweetgreen are coated with a thin layer of forever chemicals, otherwise known as PFAS chemicals. Quote, "The Counter conducted an independent test across 14 locations of 8 different New York City restaurants and found that every store had items sprayed with PFAS chemicals." Now, it's not exactly a mystery why these compostable fiber containers are sprayed with PFAS chemicals. It's simply done to prevent food and liquid from being able to soak through. It makes sense, but in practical terms, what appears to have happened, at least according to this research, is that some companies, whether realizing it or not, simply substituted one form of plastic for another. Instead of having fully plastic containers, they now have fiber containers coated with a thin layer of plastic. And this presents two problems. First of all, it creates a problem with the claim that these containers are compostable, because while the fiber will disintegrate in a landfill, well, most gardeners wouldn't want to compost something that's laced with plastic. And second of all, the PFAS chemical film that surrounds these containers, well, it presents at least the possibility of a hazard to human health, especially since it is coming into direct contact with the actual food, and very likely it will end up in the water. And by the way, just as an aside, this report from the Counter publication was not the only one. There have been other such reports, such as this March 2023 study published in the Environmental Science and Technology Journal, which found similar results. This study, it had researchers testing 44 different fast food container packages, and after doing so, they found that the ones with the highest concentration of PFAS chemicals were molded, compostable bowls. Also, besides having a layer of PFAS chemicals, these fiber containers, they're more expensive than plastic containers, and therefore, this is not a viable solution. Again, people in the Philippines, who represent about 35% of all plastic pollution in the oceans, they're not about to switch to a more expensive fiber container. However, there is real hope on the horizon for an actual viable solution to this problem. Because instead of switching out plastic containers for fiber containers coated in plastic, in the very near future, restaurants might be utilizing bioplastics made from either seaweed or from algae. And while the term bioplastic might quite literally sound dystopian, well, these seaweed-based alternatives could actually be the perfect solution, as they could be made completely naturally without any forever PFAS chemicals at all. In fact, here are just some of the numerous benefits of seaweed bioplastics. They are not petroleum-based at all and don't require any fossil fuels to produce. They're for the most part scalable with the existing manufacturing infrastructure that already exists for regular plastics. The raw materials are sourced from offshore farms, meaning that they don't compete with the needs of land-based agriculture. Algae and seaweed are some of the fastest growing plants in the world, meaning their availability is plentiful. They require no fresh water or fertilizer. They are, for the most part, backyard compostable, and they don't require any industrial-level composting facilities in order to degrade them. And then lastly, and perhaps more wildly, in some cases, bioplastics are in fact edible, meaning that in the near future, after finishing your burrito bowl, you might be able to eat the actual bowl. Now, of course, most people probably won't eat the bowl itself, but the point is that this new type of plastic made from algae and seaweed, well, it is safe for human consumption and it's biodegradable. For instance, just 3 months ago, the University of California over at San Diego, they released the results of their study. You can see it up on your screen. It's a study on bioplastics that was titled, quote, "Rapid Biodegradation of Microplastics Generated from Bio-Based Thermoplastic Polyurethane." For this study, the university researchers partnered with a company called Algenesis, which produces plastic made from algae. Functionally, this algae-based plastic is as durable as regular plastic, and the researchers, they wanted to test how well it biodegrades in both a compost environment as well as in a liquid environment, in water. And so, in order to test, the research team, they took this algae-based bioplastic and compared it to traditional petroleum-based traditional plastic. And what they did is they took both samples, they ground them up to be really fine microparticles, and then they placed them into two separate environments. In a compost environment, the algae-based material was being digested by microbes, which is the critical piece of composting. The traditional plastics were not. Likewise, in a water environment, the algae bioplastics dissolve very well. After 90 days, only 32% of the bioplastic was still in the water. After 200 days, only 3% was still there, meaning that within the span of only about 7 months, the algae bioplastic had about a 97% biodegradation rate, which is especially amazing when you compare that to traditional plastic, which had a 0% biodegradation rate. Meaning, in practical terms, that even if human behavior around the world, including in Asia, doesn't change, and people continue to dump their used plastic into the rivers and the oceans, if that plastic is algae-based, it wouldn't really matter, because within the span of about a year, it would naturally biodegrade almost entirely. Compare that to regular plastic, which can take anywhere from 100 to even 1,000 years to degrade. In fact, here's what Dr. Stephen Mayfield, who's a professor of molecular biology over at UC San Diego, here's what he said on the matter.
Once you understand that petroleum is simply fossil algae, then you can recognize right away, well, I can take modern algae oil, I can take oil produced in algae today, and I can convert that into any product that I make from petroleum. So they're sustainable, and that's really important. That means the CO2 that's in them we didn't pull out of the ground. But more important than that, because we made it from modern algae oil, they're biodegradable. So when you're done with that surfboard, you strip the fiberglass off it and throw it into a compost pile, and it will be eaten by bacteria and fungus.
And so, at this point, you might be asking the next logical question. If this technology already exists, why is it not being used at scale? And the answer to that is rather simple. What appears to be the only drawback is the price. At the moment, economically, these seaweed-based bioplastic containers are not able to compete with the low cost of normal fossil fuel plastics. However, that might soon change. There are multiple companies who are actively working on the financial feasibility problem. In fact, in the year 2020, you had an environmental protection organization called Lonely Whale partner with the Tom Ford fashion company to launch something called Unwrap the Future. Here's how this initiative describes itself over on the website. Quote, in 2020, Lonely Whale launched Unwrap the Future, a 3-phased, multi-year program with an ambitious mission. Vet and scale marine-safe alternatives to traditional thin-film plastic, which accounts for nearly half of annual ocean plastic pollution.
Together with Lonely Whale, we launched the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize to effect the largest commercial shift away from thin-film plastic.
And 3 years after launching, in March of 2023, this initiative announced the winner of their $1.2 million Plastic Innovation Prize. All 3 of the grand prize winners, they were companies that make bioplastics out of either seaweed, kelp, or other types of algae, with all these bioplastics being designed to decompose and biodegrade naturally. The 3 winning companies were America-based Sway, India-based Zero Circle, and UK-based Notpla. Working backwards, Notpla's third-place winning design was a coating for fast food containers that utilized seaweed instead of PFAS chemicals. And so basically, their design allows fast food containers that are made out of fiber to be covered in a thin layer of seaweed-derived coating, which would keep the food and drinks from leaking through, but at the same time, not be toxic to the human consumer. And what's interesting is that this company, they already have a proof of concept for their product called the UHO capsule. It's basically an edible bubble made from seaweed that replaces water bottles. Now, the second place winner of that contest was India-based Zero Circle. They developed a coating for food containers made from plankton. This coating is both recyclable as well as home compostable. In fact, in boiling water, their plastic film dissolves in just a few seconds. In seawater, it dissolves in a couple of hours, and in a compost pile, it only takes about 4 months. They plan to start selling their products later this year to film manufacturers for several different products.
The company plans to begin selling pellets by 2024. The idea is that manufacturers could make edible, biodegradable forms of many products, like dissolvable soup and tea bag packets, wrappers for burgers, gift wraps, fashion packaging, and good old grocery store bags.
And then lastly, the grand prize winner of that initiative was America-based Sway. Their innovation was a thermoplastic seaweed resin. It's made from seaweed, you can compost it at home, and perhaps best of all, this company's seaweed resin integrates well with the existing plastic manufacturing infrastructure that's already in place, meaning that this company is able to use the seaweed resin with the existing plastic machinery that already exists in countries around the world, making the switch that much easier and that much less expensive. Furthermore, besides just the 3 companies in this competition, there's actually an entire growing industry of edible seaweed-based bioplastics. You have companies like Lollyware, which makes edible cups, Flexi, which makes edible film, and Oceanium, which makes biodegradable ink. All these companies, they are working to create a scalable, inexpensive, durable, and perhaps most importantly, safe alternative to the plastics that come into contact with our food, which really does seem, at least to me, like the best free market solution to the microplastics problem. Because if these companies are really able to develop a strong but cheap alternative, then without having to change any human behavior at all the plastic that's coming out of Asia and the rest of the world will naturally just dissolve in the ocean. And all the plastic touching our food, it will not lead to bioplastics in our bloodstream. Now, only time will tell whether this is really achievable or not. And also, who knows, maybe seaweed bioplastics have their own dangers that we're just not aware of yet. However, at the very least, I can say this. While you have kids all over the world gluing themselves to roads, blocking traffic, and throwing paint and soup on priceless works of art in order to save the planet, well, here you have real people who are doing the real work to try to really reduce the amount of actual plastic pollution in this world, although they get very little recognition. And if plastic pollution is to be solved, it'll likely be by companies like these, working to create a seaweed and algae-based plastic that are as strong as regular plastics, but are non-toxic and biodegradable. Because again, the vast majority of plastic pollution comes from Asia, about 80%, mostly from Southeast Asia. And they don't care how many roads you block in Germany, or how many paintings you cover in soup over in France. That does not matter. However, if you're able to create a plastic alternative that is cheap and that naturally dissolves in the ocean, well, that is a real solution to the problem. If you'd like to go deeper into the topic of these bioplastics or any of the studies we discussed regarding the microplastics in our bloodstream, in our bodies, and our stool and everything else, I'll throw all those notes down into the description box below this video for you to peruse at your own leisure, which I should mention is that same description box right below those like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you take a quick moment to smash. And then lastly, I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think that these bioplastics are a good idea? Are they a good alternative solution to the microplastics problem? Or do you think that this is just a case of science trying to solve a problem and then likely causing a new problem in its in that solution? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please leave them in the comment section below. I'll be reading through them later tonight as well as into the week. And then lastly, I'm sorry for my absence for the last month. I took a month off. I hope you didn't miss me too much, but we will be publishing episodes starting today, so I hope you appreciate them. And if you would like early access to our episodes, we will be publishing episodes over on Epic TV 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the schedule days ahead of YouTube. So if you want early access to all the episodes, including a huge swath of exclusive episodes that we'll be publishing over on Epic TV that we will not be able to publish on YouTube due to reasons of censorship, well, I hope you subscribe to Epic TV. I'll throw the link to that subscription landing page. You'll be able to find it down in the description box below. Hope to see you over there. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.